Our house in Aba had 3 bedrooms, but one of them was forbidden. It wasn't a fancy house, cement walls, brown curtains, a small sitting room with a fan that wheezed like an old man. But that middle room, my father's room, held silence the way some rooms hold perfume. Even after he travelled for business, the door stayed locked, the key always on his chain. "You don't enter my room," he used to say. "That place is not for playing." He never said why. When I was 9, curiosity started living under my skin. My mother never went inside either, not even to sweep. Once I asked her, "Why can't I clean it when he's away?" She said, "Your father said no." "But you're his wife." She lowered her eyes. "Yes, that's why I listen." The more they said no, the more I heard the room calling me. At night I'd press my ear to the wooden door. Sometimes I'd hear things, soft taps, a scraping sound like paper folding itself. Once I heard breathing, not heavy breathing but long, slow, patient, like something counting the time between my heartbeats. When I told my friend N. Namdi at school, he laughed. "Maybe your papa day hide juju there." I laughed too, pretending not to think about how my father prayed every morning but still poured palm oil on the ground before long journeys. One Saturday afternoon, when both my parents were at a cousin's naming ceremony, I found the key. He had left it by mistake on his reading table. The door opened easier than I expected. Dust, light, and the smell of camphor wrapped around me. The curtains were drawn, the bed neatly made, but on the table beside his Bible was a jar. It was the kind you use for pickled fruits, sealed with metal. Something was inside, floating in a clear liquid, long, dark, coiled. At first I thought it was rope, then it moved. A tail. Not fish, not lizard. It was thick and alive, pulsing slightly, the tip twitching like it was tasting the air. I froze, it twitched again harder. The jar rattled once, then stilled. When I ran out of the room, I left the key in the lock. By the time my parents came home, the door was shut again from the inside. For 3 days I couldn't look my father in the face. He walked around the house like everything was normal, whistling his high-life tunes, teasing Mama, reading newspapers. But every time he passed the corridor, I'd hear the faintest rattle from that door, like glass bumping glass. The night of the 3rd day, the sound woke me. Not a rattle now, a drag, slow and heavy, like something being pulled across a table. I crept out with my torchlight. The corridor was half dark, the bulb flickering weakly. I bent low, looked under the door and saw movement. A shadow sliding back and forth, dragging something that glinted wet. I whispered "Papa," but no answer came. The next morning I told Mama. She sighed, "You dream too much." But she didn't meet my eyes. That evening when Papa came home, she whispered to him. I heard her voice trembling, the way people sound when they are pretending not to accuse. She said something is moving inside. He didn't shout, he just looked at me and said quietly, "You went in." I didn't answer. The silence that followed felt like punishment enough. "Did you open the jar?" he asked. I shook my head. He nodded slowly, then went into the room and locked it again. For hours I heard him talking in a language that was Igbo, wasn't English. Deep, rolling syllables that felt too old for walls. Later that night when everyone slept, I heard the door open. I peeked. My father came out carrying the jar wrapped in a white cloth. He didn't see me as he left the house barefoot, humming low like a man in pain. I waited until dawn. When he returned, his wrapper was wet and streaked with something dark. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from staying open too long. The next morning there was no jar in the room. The table was clean, but the smell, that faint mix of camphor and decay, remained. That day the geckos left our walls. Life moved on, but the house never quite breathed right after that night. My father became quieter. He started wearing a black thread around his wrist and avoiding mirrors. When I asked about it, he said, "It keeps the old from following." Following what, he didn't say. At night I began to dream of the jar. Not seeing it but hearing it, the soft clink of glass, the faint pulse inside. Sometimes in the dream, the tail reached out, pressing against the lid like a hand wanting to touch. One evening, Mama found 3 dead lizards near the bathroom door. "Maybe the cat," she said, but her voice trembled. The same night I woke to a sound again, a knock on the floor beneath my bed. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned down, heart hammering. Between the floorboards something moved. I could hear it sliding, slow and wet. The smell of camphor returned, sharp as memory. By morning, my father's wrist thread had turned red like it had been dipped in dye. He noticed, frowned, and cut it off. When I came back from school that day, the thread was gone, but a scratch ran across the living room wall, long, deep, jagged. It looked like someone had dragged a nail dipped in fire across the paint. Papa saw it and said nothing. At night the noise returned louder. I pressed my ear to the wall and a whisper came through, almost tender. "Open it." When I was 13, Papa fell sick. The doctor called it stress. He called it old promises. He started talking in his sleep, sometimes in that strange language again, sometimes in plain words. "It was supposed to stay buried," he murmured once. "They said the tale was enough." One afternoon when Mama went to the market, I sat beside his bed. "Papa, what was in that jar?" I asked. He stared at me for a long time, his eyes yellowed with fever and something older. "A debt," he said softly. "Before I married your mother, I went to a man in Owerri. He gave me help when business failed. He said when I prosper, I'll keep his gift safe till I have a child. Then it would rest." "What gift?" He smiled, tired. "A part of something too alive. He said it won't harm if it stays closed." "And you believed him?" He looked at me sharply. "Do you think you'd be eating in this house if I did?" The silence afterward was thick. That night I dreamt again, but this time I saw clearly. A hand, not mine. Unscrewing the jar. The tail uncoiling, rising like smoke, and a voice saying, "I have waited 13 years. When I woke, the jar was on my table. Empty. I screamed. Mama rushed in, saw the jar and froze. Her eyes went wide with something between fear and recognition. "He brought it back," she whispered. The floor creaked. My father stood in the doorway, pale and shaking. "Don't touch it," he said. "Why is it empty?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Because it's awake." We heard it then from under the bed, the sound of something sliding, slow and deliberate. A faint thud followed, like a tail hitting wood. Mama began to pray, words tripping over each other. My father knelt, mumbling in that old tongue, voice breaking. The power cut out. The room went black except for my phone light trembling in my hand. From the darkness, a voice, soft, hissing, familiar, whispered, "You opened it first." "I did," I cried. The tail slid out, glistening, long as a rope, ending in nothing. It wasn't animal, it was human, covered in faint, pale hair, skin-like, pulsing as if blood ran inside. Papa stood and spread his arms wide. "Take me, not them." The thing hesitated, then coiled around his leg. He groaned, fell to his knees. The air smelled of wet clay and iron. He gasped, closed the jar. I reached for it. The lid trembled, then clamped shut by itself with a wet click. Silence. When the light returned, my father was on the floor, breathing shallow, the thread back on his wrist, now black again. The tail was gone. But when I looked closer, I saw it, a faint ridge moving under his skin, sliding toward his chest. We buried my father 6 months later. Mama said stroke, the doctor said heart failure, but I knew better. During his last week, he refused to sleep in his room. "It's waiting," he told me. "It moves when I close my eyes." The day after his burial, I entered his room for the first time since. The air was cold, still smelling of camphor. On his table sat the jar, sealed, clear, empty, but a line of condensation curved inside it, shaped like something pressing from within. I reached for it, then stopped. A note lay beneath in his handwriting. "If it calls you, don't answer. If it knocks, don't open. Some things we inherit by blood, others by curiosity." That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller without his breathing. Around 2 a.m. I heard a sound again, faint but certain. Tap, tap, tap. From under my bed. I whispered his warning, "Don't answer." The tapping stopped. The silence stretched thin, then something brushed my ankle, cold and wet. I screamed, kicked, rolled away. The jar on my table shuddered, the lid clinking softly. When I looked, a drop of clear liquid slid down its side. By morning, the jar was empty again, completely dry. I told Mama. She said, "We'll move." But before we could pack, she found something coiled neatly under my bed, a short, dark thread tied in a circle. I picked it up carefully. It pulsed once, faint but alive. That night, I tied it around my wrist. And somewhere in the walls, something sighed, content.